Hey guys, today's story is about a rather smug DM. This is not my story, but after hearing bits and pieces of it from my girlfriend over the past years, I asked her to type it out because I feel it is a little bit too perfect for the sub not to share. What follows is her story. The following people in the story are as follows, with changed names. There was me, my friend Jane, Jane's girlfriend, Doe, the DM, and the DM's girlfriend. One day, Jane asked me if I wanted to join a new 5e campaign with her, and that one of her friends would be DMing since they wanted more players, and she knew I played. I'd been playing for a couple of years, and had 2 active groups, but was happy to fit in another semi-regular thing if it meant spending more time with her and helping her get into D&D. I feel like, for context, it's important to note that Jane had played in only one short campaign before with a first-time DM friend, so she wasn't a complete newbie, but had very little experience overall with D&D. Doe was also joining and had played in a one-shot 5 years earlier, so she didn't have much experience either. Anyways, on with the story. Session 0. I get there, ready to make my character with the group and meet the DM and his girlfriend, also a player, for the first time ever. He's quite loud and overwhelming, but I roll with it since he's my friend's friend, and probably nice underneath the loudness. We had run character ideas by him over chat before, and he'd been cool with all of them, and even given us each a unique magical item to start with. Something I thought that was unusual for level 1, but sounded really cool. We start rolling stats and hashing out some character details, and he starts talking about playing. Not in a, this is what I was thinking for the campaign type of way, but in a,
please hurry up in making the character so we can start playing now
type of way. Which was alright, he was probably just enthusiastic about getting started. So we finish the character creation, have dinner, during which he makes literal pornographic sexual moans the whole time, grunting on how it's so good and oh yeah, and get to playing. He narrates how we start in a tavern, and one of us gets up to get more drinks, bumping into a guy and accidentally spilling his drink. Said guy immediately shrieks,
"How dare you insult Melvin the Mage!"
and proceeded to magically teleport all of us into a frozen tundra. Naked. In the middle of nowhere. Now I should probably mention that I was playing a wizard, so when I say we were naked, I mean no equipment at all. That means no spellbook. And as a first level wizard, I only had 2 prepared spells for that day. And suddenly, those 2 spells were the only 2 I knew in the whole wide world. Strictly speaking, I didn't have any components or an arcane focus, but I honestly forgot in the chaos, and I'm lucky he never thought about that, or I'd have effectively been completely useless. You may think that this sounds like an exciting beginning, and it totally could have been, if I had known what kind of campaign he wanted to play, and had been prepared for it. But there was zero discussion on this being a survival campaign. No talk of maybe being a wizard wasn't the best of class for this type of thing, etc. So I was in no way prepared for what was to come. Now remember how I said each of us got to get a magical item? Well, guess who was the only one who got to keep theirs? That's right, his girlfriend. Because her character was apparently the most paranoid person ever, so her item, a magical rock that could be used to cast some fire magic, had been shoved up her behind. When he mentioned that she still had that, even though everything else was gone, we were told in a smug voice by him that it's our fault our characters aren't paranoid enough to store things up our butts. You know, where all normal people put their valuables in case of a spatial relocation event while out drinking. So there we are, naked in a frozen tundra, and we spot a huge battlefield nearby where the remnants of a battle are ongoing. While we try to figure out what just happened, we suddenly start to take frost damage because of the whole naked in a frozen hellscape thing. He informs us that there are dead bodies at the edge of the battlefield, that we can go loot for scraps of clothing so that we won't freeze to death. But there are already kobolds looting there, so we will have to fight them. We try to come up with a plan, but he thinks we're taking too long, so we take more frost damage. There was no real logic when we would start taking damage. It was honestly seemingly just random, like when we would dare talk, even out of character, instead of running headfirst at the kobolds with no equipment. Again, we were level 1 and have each taken 3 or 4 cold damage already. It's here that we find out that this campaign is going to have some survival elements and be more realistic. Thankfully, Jane was playing a monk, so she did okay without weapons and punched the kobolds to death. We got some clothes, although somehow no one actually had a full set of clothing or proper armor. It was all just scraps. But we were only half dead and not actively freezing to death anymore, so yay, I guess. At the end of session 0. After the session, while we were packing up, Jane sounded pretty excited about this. And to be fair, she happened to pick a class that excelled at the scenario we were put in, while mine was at a severe disadvantage. She and Doe also have no idea that it's not typical to throw your players into a survival realism campaign without letting them know first. So I grit my teeth, but figure that this could be an interesting setting. They're excited, and maybe this will be fine. He couldn't be that mean. He was just thoughtless about not telling us about the setting. Hindsight tells me that this was a bad idea. I did try to bring up my severe disadvantage to the DM, and the conversation went like this. I sure hope we can manage to find my spell book before we level up, though.
Oh yeah, you would have gotten 2 spells when you leveled up, if you had your spell book, but you don't. So you'll just have to live off whatever scraps I give you.
Please imagine the most arrogant, smirking, self-righteous tone of voice that you can. It's probably not going to be as bad as his tone was. He proceeded to laugh in a way that, to me, said he thought I was a moron, not that he was kidding. I mentioned this to Jane after he left, and how uncomfortable he had made me, but she said she was sure he was kidding. He just had a weird sense of humor. He definitely isn't mean, and I'm sure he has a plan for all of this. Don't worry. We'll probably find our gear next session. It'll be great. And I trusted her. And it was a mistake. Session 1. The next time we met was about a week later, and I convinced myself that the first time really wasn't that bad. I was just taken by surprise by the whole survival thing, but hey, hanging out with friends and D&D are my 2 favorite things. Jane said that he wasn't mean on purpose, so today will definitely go way better. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The session can be summed up as we go into a fort that's nearby to look for food, gear, help, or whatever. People don't exactly attack us on sight, but no one there is friendly. We talk to a quartermaster and manage to beg some basic weapons out of him. He laughs in my face when I ask if they happen to have a spellbook, or even an empty book I could turn into one. Our characters are starving, and seemingly the only people with food around is a group of bugbears that Jane fistfights to get us some. As a level 1 character, may I remind you. Here we have the single nice thing I can remember from this DM. When the bugbear super pummels her character instead of full-on killing her, they revive her, communicate that she put up a good fight, and gives us food. We sleep there and head out in the morning to try to get to anywhere near civilization. We were teleported into that empty, terrible part of the fantasy map no one ever goes to, and is just mentioned as the bad unknown place with lots of monsters. And now is when our DM mentioned that he doesn't believe in full healing on a long rest.
It's stupid and unrealistic to think wounds can heal overnight.
He says, we can use up all of our healing spells before a long rest, and heal as much as we can with those, or if we get healing items. But no natural healing here, not even hit dice on short rests. This hasn't been communicated before. No discussion on whether we're cool with this, Just a statement on that's how it is. I try to say something, but get shut down again with him saying that this is an optional rule in the DMG, if I want to look it up. And I did actually later, and it is. But hit dice are still a thing in it, and it's definitely not something you throw on players without their consent. And since I'm very non-confrontational, and both Jane and Doe don't see anything wrong with this, I end up going along for now. We also got no experience for this. Did I mention we were using experience? Yeah, we got like 10 per person for the kobolds in session 0, and nothing for the roleplay. I had never used experience before, and it's been a few years, so I don't remember the actual amount, but from my knowledge of experience now, what we got was definitely less than what we should have had. We weren't even 1/3 of the way to level 2 after 2 sessions. After the session, I once again talked to Jane about this being sort of frustrating, but she assured me he was definitely not being mean on purpose, that this was all going to be great fun. However, she promised to mention it to him that I was feeling bad about not having a spellbook. He probably had a plan for everything. Session 2. The final session. Prior to this session, the DM said something in our group chat about how this was a super dangerous place we'd landed in, which meant a lot of dead adventurers to loot, so equipment wasn't going to be a problem. If anything, I should think of myself as lucky to be a wizard, since I could loot a bunch of spellbooks. If we found any undead adventurers. Honestly, wizard is the best class to be around here, clearly, and no reason at all to have to complain. I was skeptical, but figured his talk with Jane had had some effect, and some things would start to get better. However, I'm an overly trusting idiot. The summary of the session, and it was a short session. We traveled the wilderness and came upon a camp of a handful of orcs, who we had to fight. We rolled perception checks at the start of that, which we all failed. After we nearly died, since we all have crappy weapons and are still level 1, we actually managed to defeat them. We looted them, and the camp yielded little, but the DM graciously allowed me another perception check on the camp. I succeeded to realize that they're burning spellbooks. Yep. They didn't have one in the camp for me to find. They were burning one, and the perception check and how fast we defeated them mattered. He noted that he only gave me that extra perception check out of the goodness of his heart, and allowed me to salvage a single page with a single spell. Still no empty book to make a new spellbook, or money to transcribe the spell, but hey, he's so very nice to throw that squeaky wheel some scraps here, isn't he? He sure seemed to think so, at least. And I'd have no complaints from here on out. A spellbook page must have fixed all the problems. Anyways, we used their camp and rested up, spending 2 days to actually heal back to full since we didn't have a lot of healing spells, and weren't allowed to use any other way of healing. We got paltry sums of experience for the fight, nothing for RPR exploration, but we were finally about halfway to level 2 now. Shortly after the session, we had the following exchange in the group message. I just copied and pasted the quotes here.
You've spent 2 days of rations and recovery, leaving you with 3 days worth of rations. Although you have found the campsite in the little chasm that protects you from the worst of the elements, so at least you guys could rest.
To be fair, at least 3 of us are supposed to be able to forage basic food and water for 5 people a day because of backgrounds.
True, although that would leave the camp exposed, and the foraging knowledge would mostly be useful to hunt in this hostile climate, but outside of a situation where one of you is mortally wounded, yeah, you can slow the pace of your passage and fan out to search for game.
One of us who isn't as badly wounded, leaving for a couple of hours to find food, wouldn't leave the camp too exposed, especially if they didn't wander too far. But yeah, based on our abilities, food shouldn't be a problem. Besides, did the orcs have no food at all in their camp? That's pretty idiotic of them in this harsh climate, isn't it?
These are all excellent thoughts and ideas. You should hold on to them for your character to think.
He shut the conversation off there. I feel like all of my conversations with him went like that. Worse in person because of his tone. I wish this story ended with me telling him he's a horrible DM, and no way am I playing with him again. My non-confrontational self was saved by Jane and Doe getting sick when we planned to play next. I had convinced myself to give it one more session before calling it quits. Jane was leaving for a 2-week trip shortly after, and since this wasn't a regularly scheduled thing, I strategically never suggested playing again. I had already told Jane I wasn't really into this, and recommended her D&D things like Critical Role and the Adventure Zone to listen to during her travels, which led her to realizing how weird our situation was. Not to say that CR or TAZ are blueprints for correct D&D, but still, it gave some perspective. Months later, after finishing some of those podcasts, she apologized for not seeing how bad things were. She never suggested another session either, and that was that. Thus ended my least favorite campaign ever, with the worst DM I've ever played with. I hope it was an enjoyable read, because it sure the heck wasn't an enjoyable experience. Well guys, this is yet another DM that has played with a significant other and has shown them blatant favoritism. I'd also like to say that you should not prevent a character from using pretty much any of their abilities in the manner that he did it. As a DM, you're there to make the players have fun, not be anti-fun. But in any case, guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have a story that you'd like me to narrate, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.